For our group, we decided to find a risk mitigation strategy for the country of Pakistan. We'll start with a brief overview of Pakistan. Pakistan is located in southern Asia and has a population of 244 million people. It is the fifth most populous country in the world. Pakistan has some of the highest disaster risks in the world. They have an extremely high risk for earthquakes, floods, and cyclones. With climate change on the rise, it is expected for the risk of these natural disasters to increase in several regions along the country. These natural disasters pose risks to the economy and human lives, especially to those who are living in underprivileged communities. The majority of the natural disasters that strike Pakistan come without any warning, such as the landslides and earthquakes, but can have devastating effects on the community. The goal of our group is to lower the fatality rate that occurs when unexpected earthquakes take place. Next, we're going to give an overview about the plate tectonics in Pakistan. Pakistan is actually split between the boundary of the Eurasian and Indian plates. It is a convergent plate boundary where the Indian plate slides towards the north relative to the Eurasia plate that is going east. Because of this convergent plate boundary, major mountain ranges were formed. These mountain ranges make up the Himalayan mountains. The collision of these plates also has to do with the thrust fault. These are low-angle convergent faults that produce the largest earthquakes on Earth. These earthquakes are of magnitude 8 and higher. The majority of earthquakes that occur in Pakistan are in the north, northwest, and west parts along the Indian plate. Since 1950, more than 83,100 people have died in Pakistan as a direct result of the earthquakes.
So in front of us, we have two maps of Pakistan, one that talks about the seismic zones of Pakistan, another one that shows the urban versus rural areas of Pakistan. So first starting with the seismic zones, as you can see, there are three areas of seismic activity classified by the red and orange colors, and those are in the south and the west and the north. And just contrasting that with the rural urban areas, you can see that those three areas of high seismic activity are rural areas. And specifically talking about in the north, where we're going to be focusing our efforts to, it is an area with high seismic activity and also a very rural area, which definitely affects the people in that area and how earthquakes, how much damage earthquakes actually do. So as I was talking about, North rural Pakistan is a very seismically active area. 62% of Pakistan as a whole is rural, and 80% of the poor population of Pakistan live in rural areas. So just goes to show that a lot of poor people are in these rural areas, which are very seismically active. Most rural structures in this area are made from a combination of not very durable materials, not very strong materials, very accessible in these areas, but some of these materials are adobe, mud, and stone. And as I mentioned, these are not very strong building materials. They're very weak. And because of this, when there is ground shaking or seismic activity, it creates a larger hazard for the rural people in this area. One example I want to talk about is the Kashmir earthquake of 2005. It's one of the largest earthquakes in recent history and one of the most catastrophic earthquakes in recent history. It occurred in October of 2005, specifically in northern Pakistan, and a little bit of India was also affected. It had a magnitude of 7.6, and some of the effects of it, over 80,000 people died, 4 million people were left homeless, and 780,000 buildings were damaged beyond repair. And this was found in a helicopter flyover study that 80% of these buildings were located in rural areas, which just goes to show how weak these buildings are because of their building materials and because of the availability of financial resources that the people lack in these areas.
Earthquake hazards. So with earthquakes, the majority of casualties come from the collapse of structures. So like roofs falling in. In this picture, you can see the damage done by a earthquake. Bricks falling, hitting people in the head, and sorts of things like that. So in North Pakistan region, it's largely affected by this because there's little building code enforcement and there's not enough funding to create durable and properly made structures, which leads to lots of collapse on any earthquakes and lots of damage because of the lack of building codes and the lack of funds. Our mitigation technique that we found is to enforce lightweight roofs and lightweight buildings. Because heavy unattached roofs with earthquakes leads to a building collapse, and those heavy roofs they got to come down, so they're going to fall down and hit people inside the house, ultimately causing fatalities, doing lots of damage. So a mitigation technique would be to just create it out of lightweight material. That way, if it does crash in the event of an earthquake, if it falls, it's not necessarily going to kill you. It's not going to do much bodily harm. The majority of casualties from earthquakes are in rural areas where mud brick housing is common, which is really common to see the housing just completely collapse and crush everyone inside the house. The mitigation technique is also cost effective because straw, hay, mud, it's all natural resources that don't necessarily need engineers to implement it. They don't need, steel members and real heavy duty construction. It's quite simple. Since it's lower cost, it means it's more attainable in the area. And unfortunately, it's not currently widely implemented in northern Pakistan, but it could make a substantial difference. Why this technique? Earthquakes are unpredictable, so you can't use warning systems or shelter orders. Those aren't going to work. Rural Pakistan, their buildings are poorly constructed. It's all mud brick housing, and strong earthquakes are going to bring down all these houses. It's not reasonable to rebuild each building in its entirety either. It's poor, so engineers, reinforced steel, rebar concrete foundations, way too costly, and it's out of the picture. And the safety of the citizens and the structures is the priority here. So any damage done by an earthquake will be to the house, not the residents inside. And so straw and hay is replaceable, but a life is not.
So to make sure our mitigation technique was achievable, we had to take a lot of considerations into account. So firstly, Pakistan's climate is favorable for growing alfalfa hay. And the cultivation of this hay is increasing in the area. So there would be no scarcity on these resources, and it would be very easy for almost everyone to have access to it. Additionally, villages are surrounded by agricultural land, creating easy access to materials such as mud, grass, dray, etc. So again, there's a lot of land covered in these resources, so this would be a great technique that could be easily achievable. Similarly to Panos and Thomson Reuters Foundation, these organizations receive financial support from non-government orgs and corporate sectors to build disaster-resilient buildings in the villages of Pakistan. So we would have the funding to do this through similar means. And additionally, Kutcha houses are an existing good example of the type of housing / roofing we're trying to design with our technique, as you can see in the picture to the right. So as for costs, Pakistan has made progress reducing poverty between 2001 to 2018 with expansion of off-farm economic opportunities, but with COVID, the economy has been negatively affected. So the government's post-disaster needs assessment estimates that the need for rehabilitation and reconstruction is at $16.3 billion US. So there is a need for costs to go down, and to do so, our technique would be very cost effective. The poverty rates still remain at around 40%. So our technique provides not only cost effective materials, but it will also be available for everyone in poor remote regions. So hay, mud, and straw are really easily accessible in Pakistan's geographic region. So it shouldn't be really costly to have to transport these materials from one place to the other. It'd be really easy for everyone to have access to these, and we could still get the funding for constructing these houses as well. And then these are the resources we used for the research for our project. Thanks for listening.